Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 12th episode of the Daily Grind. I have tried to have it all together this morning. Sometimes things don't go as smoothly as we planned, but it is a beautiful morning. I'm glad to be here and to talk about the things that we're going to talk about today. There may be some background noise. That's one of the things that I was talking about. Um, I've got my neighbors building a barn out here, and they've got trucks coming out here at 6:30, which I don't mind because obviously I'm already up. But if we're having any difficulty hearing at some point, that could be part of the reason why. Also, I left my glasses over uh, where I sleep, and I could potentially end up waking up my children if I go back to get those. So if I'm like squinting a little bit, that may be it as well. But I do have my cup of coffee and I am excited to dive in, and hopefully we can find a little bit of clarity together this morning. Um, so, what we went over the past few days is different rules of engagement. And the reason why that's so important, as we priorly discussed, is not just about this podcast. It's that a majority of our miscommunications that are going on are the result of these type of mistakes where we don't realize that the other person isn't actually understanding what we're talking about. And so we'll start with a brief recap of some of the things that we went over. We talked about terms. So term distinction was one of those things, making sure that when we're discussing two different things, that those things are absolutely identifiable. So as we said here, um, if you were discussing just the wrapper instead of the whole water bottle, making sure that it's known which one you're talking about. Also, having a fixed term, making sure that it doesn't shift and change during the course of the conversation because it can very quickly be derailed. Then we talked about the law of wholes versus the law of, so it would be called the law of parts, and the law of composition is actually the technical names. So that means when we take this lid and this bottle apart, it is no longer to be viewed in the context of the conversation or even in reality as two different parts of one whole. It actually is two new wholes. And so we don't get confused what we're talking about that way. The law of composition is just that in reverse. If I put this back over onto here, I no longer have two wholes, I have one new whole. And it's just making sure that we don't overlap. When you're talking about the lid, I'm talking about the bottle with the lid, and we just may end up with some overlap. Let's just try to avoid that type of confusion because the types of things that we talk about on this podcast are really deep and difficult to understand as it is. Just slipping up on communication, getting our terms correct, is going to cause a lot of unnecessary difficulty. But as I said before, it doesn't just have to apply here. If you take those exact same concepts and you apply them to your relationship with your spouse or your girlfriend or boyfriend or your friends, or I mean even your coworkers, it goes down the list. If you apply these type of rules of engagement when it comes to your communication with other people, I think you're going to find that it becomes much more effective, a lot less frustration. Now, of course, there's going to be times when they go, "Why are you being so tedious?" And you can say to them, "It's because I want to make sure I don't misrepresent you. I don't want to misunderstand you. I want us to be on the same page." That was the title of yesterday's episode, getting on the same page. And we're kind of finishing that right now, but we're going to do it in a more particular thought or type of way I don't know about any of you who have built a house before. That's what I've been in the process of for at least a couple of years now. And you could say things went exactly as I planned them every step of the way. Now, if any of you have actually built a house, you know that was completely incorrect. It didn't even go close. In fact, the fact that I am still working on it a year or so after when I planned to finish initially should be a testament how things don't go always the way that you hope that they will. Sometimes that's going to happen on this podcast as well. Sometimes that's going to happen in the daily life, in our communication with one another. And the best thing we can do sometimes is to learn when to take a break. And that's kind of where we're going to finish up today. So we recapped a little bit there of what we went over yesterday. Also, we went over claim isolation, just making sure anytime that we're discussing something that it's broken down into all the different individual things like we were just talking about, so that if we're making a claim about the lid and making sure we pull the lid apart from the bottle. So a lot of these are going to be overlapping, but they each have an intended purpose and it is necessary. We talked about what the podcast is founded on. It really started with a book series called The Burden of Proof, which you can look up at burdenofproof.co. That's going to take you to the shop page where I have the first two books available now. The first one, The Flaw, is available free. And if you just hit download, it'll have an add to cart button first. Hit add to cart. It'll actually say $0 on it though. You press a couple of buttons to follow through. It won't actually ask you for any information or any money. You can download it for free right now. And it is a fictional narrative that aligns very closely with the concepts that are going to be taught all throughout this podcast. So if that's the way that you like to learn, I would encourage you to go ahead and do that. Give it a read. It's not overly long or overly complex. It just tries to take some of these concepts and bring them a real application within a narrative, which, as I've said, some people learn better different ways, and maybe that's the perfect way for you to learn. If not, we're still going to be here doing this type of method of learning as well, and I hope that you'll continue to join us for the podcast. Now, this episode was called Prepping the Ground because, like I was talking about a moment ago, when it comes to the house, before you can even lay a proper foundation, you have to level the ground. You have to put out your boundary markers. That's what we've been doing these past few days. That's what we've been doing really since I've started this series. We've been first setting out the boundary markers. And now we're leveling out the ground, making sure we got the right tools so that we're ready when the time comes to actually start pouring the slab, for lack of a better phrase, starting to put down the rebar, for example, in the footers. I know I'm using complex terms for those who haven't done construction. What it means is we're trying to build something locked in that isn't going to shift or move or change or collapse once we actually try to build upon it. And that's why it's going to feel tedious sometimes. That's why it might feel like we're overcomplicating things initially. But what we don't want by any means is for us to get to step 17 and realize that there was a crack in that foundation, that we didn't properly prep the ground, and now we've got to go all the way back and start over just because we didn't take the time to make sure that we didn't miss a step. Now, in some ways, I'm going to be teaching just a little bit out of order at first. The reason I'm telling you that is so that there's not any confusion when I straighten out the order here in a few days. Because all of these rules of engagement are actually results of the rules that define our existence as a whole. Um, they come forth from the different logical laws that dictate how we live already. And most of us already agree on what those starter laws, building blocks are when it comes to logic. And so when we get into those, a lot of those may sound familiar for many of you. Most of these rules of engagement, actually all of them, are eventually built out by starting with those components, or at least that's what I've attempted to do with this method in order to avoid miscommunication. So here in a few days there may be a slight reordering. You'll find that these rules are actually just things that we have to have in order to make our communication effective, but they don't actually start the beginning of the chain. In fact, I haven't even proven any of them true at all. I wouldn't even try to make that claim at this moment because I haven't presented you with the evidence to do so. But what I am telling you is if we're going to talk about it, it's going to be necessary for us to do so in this way. Let's see. As we were moving forward through the remainder, we went over the burden of proof concept that this series was founded on. Just like I just said, the person making the claim bears the burden of proving their claim true, except under the circumstance where there is an apparent contradiction to the laws of logic which define our reality. Let me rephrase, don't just define our reality, define reality, period. Reality simply being that which exists, all of that which exists. How do we define what exists? That which is defined or confined by the boundaries of the laws of logic. So, really, what we would be doing there is just making sure that if someone is coming from a position where they are presenting their side, or they're not the one making the claim, but their position naturally holds something that's pretty much an apparent or seemingly apparent contradiction to the laws of logic, then they still hold the burden of proof, of proving their position, because the laws of logic are going to become our working standard, the ground on which we build. So if you're going against those right off the bat, then you're always going to have the burden to prove. All right, so I think some of the last things we went over yesterday were like prior claim affirmation. That just means if we're going to go over and test a specific claim, then we need to confirm every claim we've went over in the past, because each thing will be built on the last. And that is in regards to what I was just speaking about. After the reordering, there's going to be this law of sequence, meaning everything comes in a specific order. One step is built upon the next, and so on. And once this happens, we will be making that type of affirmation based on those steps in that specific order. Also, the one thing that I didn't mention yesterday that I do want to mention today is that if you are coming onto the podcast as a live guest, the way that this method was designed was not to take multiple leaps and try to get way ahead in the chain. Not because maybe you personally can't do so, maybe you can, but everybody as a whole is going to be learning together. And so if we get too far ahead, it's just going to bring confusion instead of clarity, and it defeats the purpose for which I started this in the first place, which is so that we might learn the truth together. And so when you come up to make a claim after affirming all the prior claims, we're only going to address one claim per person as far as the method itself goes. once we've addressed that one claim, another person is going to get an opportunity to come on up and make their own claim. I do want to say, though, that this is not always going to have people who want to come up and argue these particular claims. In fact, I want to open up the door to expand the scope of what this project is for in the first place. So I don't see it doing much good if we find truth and then we just leave it sitting there as if it doesn't give us any ability to dictate what the right decisions are for our future, for our relationships, for our careers, for what we're going to do next with our purpose, with our life. Without that, the idea that we're searching for truth, it's not going to hold a whole lot of weight, even if we find it, if we don't use it for a purpose. And what I mean by I'm widening the scope is that when we do offer the opportunity for live audience here shortly, whether that be my co-host Dylan and myself together, or whether it's just me that day, I would like to give you the opportunity to test this method in action. And at that time, the steps necessary to get to what the method teaches may not have been shown yet. So what I may be giving you that day, when you ask, when you talk about your situation, what you're going through, what you're trying to make a decision about, I may ask some refining questions and bring it down to a conclusion. And I'm going to apply the methodology to help in order to make right decisions. Now, that is operating under the assumption that all of the things that lead to the step that I'm showing you and talking about would actually be true. I'm not going to make that claim that they are. What I'm going to say is that I want you to test it. I want you to be willing, if you think it sounds like it makes sense, use your own tools of logic that you have or any tools that we've already went over. Test it, see if it makes sense to you, and if it does, go ahead and try to apply it to reality and see if it works. Maybe it won't be your particular situation, but I think we have things that are a lot more relatable to one another than we realize sometimes. I would point out that most of us have similar categories of experiences, similar situations that we find ourselves. Not to say they're the exact same, but the same advice can apply across multiple situations. And so I don't want this to just be limited or stuck on the scope of finding this ideal absolute truth which has no value in our daily lives. The whole point in doing this in the first place is so that we can grow together, so that we can communicate better, so we can build one another up. If we stop at the scope of just learning what the truth is rather than applying it, it will defeat the purpose of why I started this thing in the first place. And so I do want to open up the floor. I open it up right now in the comments. If you want to put a comment on here and ask a question, talk about a situation going on in your life, ask about how would the method be applied in that particular situation, then I'm more than happy to look over those comments. Just remember that I could have multiples. It could take time for me to get back to you. It is not because I'm intending to overlook any comment, but if it does happen and I do take a little longer than you anticipate, don't hesitate to send it again, and hopefully I will be able to find it easily by the second time. It shouldn't be a problem. I don't think I should have an overload on these type of comments starting out. But what I'm generally talking about is not going to be held in the comments section. It's actually going to be held in a live venue. And I'm looking for live venues now. There's a place I have checked out. I feel like it's a very, very good fit for exactly what I'm looking for. And I will keep y'all updated as to if that works out. I'll likely stop by there today and see if we can get something worked out, because as I've said before, in the next maybe week or two, I'm really trying to nail down a place where this method can meet reality. Because once again, what good is it if we're just sitting here talking theoretical? How is that different than any other philosophy conversation that ends up with us going home not really knowing for certain that anything is true? Because if it had worked before, I don't think I'd be doing this podcast in the first place. I mean, inherently, we seem to know that something is in fact true, but we don't actually say that. We don't apply it to its fullest extent. We say, yeah, we think maybe there is something we can know, and I think this is probably best over here, but we don't make a determination that it's worth knowing and that putting our effort into it is actually going to produce a result where we can actually follow a specifically correct direction, knowing that it's the correct direction. That would be the outflow of understanding that if we did come to the conclusion that this world is in fact rational and that truth can be known, the natural outflow of that would be that we could know what the right choice was in the given situation. I know that goes against everything that we've probably been taught our whole life. It goes against what I was taught, that you can't actually know. But those same people in the next sentence, not in a negative way, but they would tell me what I should or shouldn't do, and speak as if they know. So we speak as if we know, we live as if we know, but when it comes to actually examining the beliefs we've inherited, the flaws in our thinking, examining existence and reality itself, we don't actually apply the same rules we live by in every other aspect. I just want to make sure that that's exactly what we're doing. I want to put the pressure on myself, not on y'all. Y'all take your time, no hurry. I want to put the pressure on myself to make sure I'm applying the same rules by which I live to the method, and the method to the rules by which I live. And so these constraints, these laws of logic, produce the reality in which we live. If there is a rational reality to perceive, things that are observable, repeatable, which I would say is pretty obvious if we look to the fact that things like science work in the first place. It shows that the world isn't just chaotic, that there is something rational and orderly to it. I'm not suggesting that we know what that is. I'm not suggesting that I've proven that. I'm not even making that claim as a claim today. I'm just pointing out things that we probably already have looked at and perceived and experienced in our personal life, and recognizing that maybe those things point towards something. I haven't even proven that that's evidence. The reason I'm being clear about all this is so you understand it's my intent that we don't miss any of those steps. That one step at a time, we show what evidence really is, what can count for evidence, what that evidence points toward. And we build that foundation together. And so the last thing we discussed yesterday was law of consent, which just simply means that you affirm all of these rules of engagement if you want to be on the podcast. That's so it doesn't quickly devolve into anger or frustration, and we can actually have a productive conversation and what the policy is for when to take a break. I actually use termination as the technical rule, law of termination, but the termination only applies to that moment, because if ultimately the goal is seeking truth, which it is for me, I want everybody to have the opportunity to come back. And so, to get into the specifics a little bit of what that means, if we talked about hedging and evasion, hedging simply means finding a way to not answer the question directly. I will actually probably get more specific about what those rules mean. Let's just say tomorrow. I'm not 100% on that, but probably tomorrow. And it will be cleared up when I actually post all of these rules of engagement on the website later on, probably on the social media platforms as well. So anyone trying to come on to the podcast will have that available and in front of them before they ever have any opportunity to actually come up and have a discussion. So it's basically just to affirm all of the ones we went over. But hedging in concept is simply to find a way to avoid answering a question. It could be using words such as metaphysical to avoid giving a yes or no in reality. If we wanted to have conversations about theoretical, there's plenty of platforms that desire to do that. I am trying to host a truth-based platform, and terms like this simply muddy the waters. They create ambiguity, unclearness, and an inability to move forward in the conversation. And so it's not just that term. Any term that does that kind of thing and makes a claim untestable, that would be considered hedging. Misrepresenting me, or me misrepresenting you. These rules do apply to me as well. This would be considered hedging. All kinds of things like that. An unwillingness to separate the claims, to fix your terms. All of the things that we've discussed prior to this moment. If we're unwilling to follow in those rules, this would be a form of hedging. Once it's called out and pointed out the specific form of hedging that's taking place, if you continue to do that exact scenario, that same word, that same method of hedging, of misrepresenting, of switching your terms, at that point the conversation will have to be terminated. And once again, I do say by terminated I mean taking a break. The first time you cross that boundary, it would be, you could come back the next day. Second time, 3 days. Third time, 7 days. Fourth time, 2 weeks. Fifth time, 1 month. And sixth time, 3 months. After that, you could return every 3 months. But the reason it's set up this way is not as a punishment. It's set up this way to give you time to think about better arguments, how you want to formulate it, what your goal really is, if you're really in line with seeking the truth, or if you're just wanting to come up and try to win the argument. Just gives you time to reframe, to decide if it's something that you really want to do. And I hope that when that does happen, that people are able to reorganize how they're addressing arguments, how we're communicating, and that they do come back and we get a chance to maybe sort out the original claim, maybe another claim. Either way, I don't want anybody to leave feeling like they didn't get their question answered, or like they were trying to argue in good faith and they got misrepresented, because one of those rules has something to do with cognition. It doesn't mean we're not smart enough or we're incapable of having the conversation. It means we're incapable of having it at that time. For example, sometimes I'm just too tired and I may not perceive what you're saying. It's not because you didn't say it correctly. It's because I was incapable of that moment of receiving it, processing it, inputting it, and then giving it back to you in a way that was understandable, that we could have a fluent conversation. And so that may be the case for you. In that moment, you may be too tired. I don't know about you, but I've had moments where my brain just wasn't computing anymore. I just couldn't. It was like the person in front of me was speaking a different language at that point. And I thought maybe I was understanding them. I was trying, but it just wasn't happening. That's the perfect time to take a break. Those type of things won't be that type of thing won't be considered hedging. That actually just means we're going to stop for the day and you can come back the next day. There's no kind of extended time requirement for when you can come back in regards to that. Let's see, was there anything else that I wanted to discuss today? As far as I know, that is about it. Anything that I missed, like I said, we may go over the specifics tomorrow of a bunch of the different forms of hedging so we can get a better, more nailed down idea of what that actually means. And then hopefully, it may not happen tomorrow, but hopefully towards the end of the week we can actually start addressing some of the laws of logic, particularly like the law of identity. And as I said, some of y'all may already know what that is, and may already, and most of you, in fact, all of you, are likely already applying it without even realizing it. So I'm looking forward to getting into these laws. I'm looking forward to seeking truth with y'all. And most of all, I'm looking forward to getting to know you. I hope that when I do find a venue, and if you are local, that you take the time to come out, join, at least just have a private conversation, and let's get to know one another. Let's try to build together, form community that's loving and has goodwill towards one another, because it's far more rare than it should be now, and we should be putting the desire to have a relationship with one another over the desire to be right all the time, over the desire to win an argument all the time. And realize that maybe the things that separate us aren't near as strong or near as important as the things that can bring us together. So, as I said, I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for joining for the 12th episode of the Daily Grind. And I hope to see you tomorrow morning for the 13th episode. Likely speaking, once again, it will probably start around 6:30 a.m. Could be as late as 7 a.m. I'm trying to nail down a specific time. Over time, that will be more possible. I do live with in a small RV right now. It's not small, let me rephrase. I live in an RV right now while I'm building my house. And so trying to get in and out the door without waking up the kids, it's kind of difficult. Anytime one of them moves, I wake up during the night. This is not a complaint. It's a great joy to be with my children at any time, to spend time with my wife at any time. It does, however, sometimes make it a little difficult to get up in the morning. So please forgive me if I am running a little late and you're sitting there waiting on the episode like, why isn't this happening? It's 6:45 and I haven't heard anything. Well, in the situation, once I get the studio situation to where I am in a fixed location and I'm able to get to it without bothering my children and not get woken up quite as many times as I'm getting woken up right now, then I can definitely say that consistency will be a lot more likely. But I hope that the consistency that I've been able to give has been good enough for you, and I'll try to be more and more consistent moving forward. And as I said, thank you so much if you're watching this now live, or if you come and you end up watching this in the future. I greatly appreciate it. You taking the time to be willing to listen, and I hope that you find it profitable. I hope that you find it beneficial. If you get the opportunity to practice these things in your daily life as you go through this week, I would encourage you to do so. because I really hope it produces good things in your life as far as avoiding some of the usual communication problems that we have with our families, with our friends, with anyone in general. Um, if you're looking to try to do that, please go back and check out the last episode as well, the last two episodes technically, that cover the prior laws of engagement, the overview, which is 10, which I do with my co host Dylan. He does such a great job of drawing out the important questions that we need to cover and things that I might not notice if he wasn't here. And actually, that is why it's so important that I open the floor up to y'all as well, is because there's going to be things that we miss when we're looking at it at our own on our own, because we're all coming from different backgrounds. We're all coming from different experiences. So, thank you so much, and I hope to see you tomorrow on the Daily Grind.